My adoptive family shamed me for being poor and made me serve drinks at their charity gala until my millionaire ex-boyfriend landed on the front lawn with the President of the United States. The Secret Service agent walked past my adoptive father, past my sisters in their designer gowns, and said 5 words that destroyed their empire. The president would like to meet Miss Olivia Grace. What happened next didn't just expose their lies. It revealed a secret they'd buried for 20 years. And the moment Raphael took my hand in front of those cameras, everything they built on my shame crumbled to ash. The president would like to meet Miss Olivia Grace. Those 5 words shattered the carefully constructed illusion of the Whitmore family charity gala. Every conversation stopped. Every champagne glass froze midair. Every camera in the ballroom swiveled away from my adoptive father, Jonah Whitmore, who'd spent the entire evening smiling for photographers and talking about his family's commitment to giving back. But the Secret Service agent wasn't looking at him. He wasn't looking at my sisters, Morgan and Emma, in their designer gowns and $1,000 heels. He was looking at me, Betty, the girl in the simple black catering uniform, the one who'd been hired to serve drinks at the party happening in what used to be my home. You know what they say about grace? Sometimes it doesn't arrive quietly. Sometimes it lands on your front lawn in a presidential convoy with the world's most powerful man stepping out beside your billionaire ex-boyfriend who never stopped looking for you. My name is Olivia Grace, and this is the story of how I went from sleeping in the servant quarters of a mansion that was supposed to be my home to standing before global cameras as Raphael Sinclair, tech magnate, humanitarian, and the love I thought I'd lost forever, took my hand and told the President of the United States that I was the woman who changed his life. But before I tell you how I got here, let me ask you something. Have you ever felt invisible in a room full of people who were supposed to see you? Have you ever wondered if you'd ever be enough for the people who claim to love you? Wherever you are right now, I hope you're somewhere that feels safe. Because safety is something I spent 18 years searching for in a house that had everything except kindness. If you've ever been told you should be grateful for crumbs when you deserved a feast, if you've ever been treated like charity when you were actually legacy, then this story is for you. Make sure you're ready, because what happened that night didn't just expose my family's lies. It revealed a truth that had been buried for 2 decades. If this story already stirs something within you, take a moment to subscribe. Join our circle of faith, hope, and love, and drop a comment to tell us where you're watching from. But let me start from the beginning, back when I still believed that love lived in marble halls, and that if I just stayed small enough, quiet enough, grateful enough, I might finally earn the right to be called a Whitmore. I was 6 years old when Sophia Whitmore held my hand at the orphanage and told me I was coming home. She had kind eyes and a soft voice, and when she knelt down to my level and said, "You're going to be my daughter now," I believed that miracles were real. I thought I was the luckiest girl in the world. The Whitmore estate had 32 rooms. I counted them all in my first week, running through hallways with marble floors so polished I could see my reflection grinning back at me. There were crystal chandeliers in every room, a grand piano no one played, and a library with floor-to-ceiling windows that made the morning light look like liquid gold. I thought I'd stepped into a fairy tale. I was wrong about that too. Don't get me wrong, the house was beautiful, breathtaking even. The kind of place you see in magazines with captions like Architectural Digest Home of the Year. But beauty and warmth are not the same thing, and it didn't take long for me to learn the difference. Jonah Whitmore smiled when there were guests. He'd ruffle my hair and say things like, "Our little Olivia is quite the reader, aren't you, sweetheart?" But his hand never lingered. His eyes never quite met mine. The moment the door closed behind the visitors, his smile would vanish like smoke, and I'd become invisible again, a shadow moving through his perfect house, careful not to disturb anything important. Morgan and Emma played the role of doting older sisters beautifully when Sophia was watching. They'd invite me to their rooms, let me try on their costume jewelry, teach me how to French braid my hair. But the invitations always came with conditions. Don't touch my real jewelry. Don't tell anyone I let you in here. Don't embarrass us in front of our friends. I learned quickly that their affection had an expiration date, usually around the time Sophia left the room. But Sophia, God, Sophia was different. She'd slip books onto my nightstand when no one was looking, novels about girls who survived impossible things, who found their way home against all odds. She'd sit on the edge of my bed after everyone else had gone to sleep and whisper the things I needed to hear. Don't let their world harden yours, Olivia. You have something they'll never understand, a heart that knows how to hope. I didn't know then that she was preparing me, teaching me how to survive what was coming. The house began to change the year I turned 14, right around the time Sophia's hands started trembling when she held her teacup. The doctors called it progressive, incurable, a matter of time. Jonah took control of everything. Who could visit, when, and for how long. The house that had always been cold became a tomb. Sophia's bedroom became her prison, and I became her secret keeper, sneaking upstairs after dinner to read to her, to hold her hand, to pretend that time wasn't running out. Downstairs, Morgan planned her 18th birthday party. The invitations were gold embossed. The guest list included senators' children and old money families whose names appeared in history textbooks. I heard her laughing on the phone with the caterer while I sat beside Sophia's bed, watching her mother's life slip away one shallow breath at a time. "You should go to the party," Sophia whispered one night, her voice so thin I had to lean close to hear. "You should be a kid, Olivia, not a nurse. I'd rather be here," I told her, and I meant it. The night Sophia died, the house was quiet. No music, no laughter. Just the sound of her final breath leaving the room and taking all the warmth with it. I stayed with her until morning, holding her hand long after it went cold, because I couldn't bear the thought of her being alone. When Jonah finally came to get me, he didn't hug me, didn't cry. He just stood in the doorway and said, "The funeral director will be here at noon. You should shower and change into something appropriate." That was it. That was all he gave me. Everything changed after that. My belongings started disappearing. First, the expensive things Sophia had given me, the necklace with the tiny pearl, the cashmere sweater, the leather journal. Then the smaller things, the things that shouldn't have mattered but somehow did. My favorite mug, the framed photo of me and Sophia at my 8th grade graduation, the quilt she'd made for my bed. My name was removed from the family mailbox. The college fund Sophia had mentioned in her will was reallocated to more pressing family needs. My bedroom, the one with the built-in bookshelves and the window seat where I used to read, was given to Morgan's friend who needed a place to stay for the summer. I was moved to the old servants' quarters on the 3rd floor, a room with no heat and a bathroom I had to share with the housekeeper. At dinner one night, 3 weeks after Sophia's funeral, Jonah set down his fork and looked at me like I was a problem he was trying to solve. "Be grateful, Olivia," he said, his voice smooth as polished marble and twice as cold. "Everything you are came from this family. Without us, you'd be nowhere. You'd be nothing." Morgan nodded, cutting her steak with surgical precision. Emma stared at her plate. I nodded too, even though something inside me was screaming. I smiled, even though tears were burning behind my eyes like acid. I said, "Yes, sir. Thank you, sir," even though the words tasted like poison. But as I walked past Sophia's empty chair, past the place where she used to sit and make the house feel like a home, a single thought began to burn quietly inside me. Small at first, but growing brighter with every step. One day I'll make you see who I really am. I just didn't know yet how long that day would take to arrive, or how spectacular it would be when it finally came. University was supposed to be my escape, a place where nobody knew my last name or the mansion I'd been exiled from, where I could finally be just Olivia, not the adopted daughter, not the charity case, not the girl who should be grateful. I became a ghost on purpose. I sat in the back of lecture halls, ate lunch alone in the library, and never raised my hand even when I knew the answer. Invisibility had become my survival skill, and I wore it like armor. Until Raphael Sinclair walked into my computer science elective and shattered my carefully constructed isolation with a single question. "Is this seat taken?" I looked up from my laptop, startled. The lecture hall was half empty. There were at least 30 available seats that didn't require sitting next to the quiet girl in the thrift store cardigan. "It's free," I said, expecting him to sit down, ignore me, and spend the next hour on his phone like everyone else. Instead, he glanced at my screen. You're coding in Python? I nodded, instinctively minimizing the window. Don't, he said quickly. I wasn't trying to be nosy. It's just, I'm working on something similar. An education platform. I've been stuck on the API integration for weeks. That's how it started, not with romance or drama or any of the things you see in movies. Just two people solving a problem together, hunched over a laptop in the back of a lecture hall while the professor droned on about algorithms we'd both already mastered. Raphael wasn't like anyone I'd ever met. He didn't ask about my background or why I always wore the same three outfits or why I never went to parties. He didn't care about the things that usually mattered to people. He cared about ideas, big, impossible, beautiful ideas about how to change the world. What if we could connect rural students to quality education, he said one night at the library, his eyes bright with possibility. Not just videos, real mentorship, real community. That would cost millions, I said, trying to be practical. Then we'll start small. We'll build the prototype, prove it works, and find people who believe in it. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw something I hadn't seen in years. Someone who believed not just in the project, but in me, in us. We named it BridgeEd. We worked on it every night, fueled by terrible coffee and the kind of hope that only exists when you're young enough to think anything is possible. He taught me to code better. I taught him to think about users who didn't have reliable internet or brand new devices. For the first time since Sophia died, I felt like I mattered, like I was building something that belonged to me. I should have known it wouldn't last. I don't know how Morgan found out about Raphael. Maybe she followed me. Maybe she still had access to my social media. Maybe she just had a radar for anything in my life that resembled happiness. But one day I walked into the student center and felt the shift immediately. The stares, the whispers, the way conversations stopped when I passed. By evening, I understood why. Screenshots of private messages I'd never sent. Documents allegedly showing I'd stolen proprietary code from Raphael's family company. Anonymous posts claiming I'd manipulated him for money, for connections, for a way out of my poverty. The posts were detailed, professional, devastating. Raphael's mentor, a professor who'd been helping us with the project, called him into his office. When he came out, his face was pale. "We need to talk," he said. We went to the courtyard. It was starting to rain, that light mist that makes everything look blurred and unreal. "Did you do it?" he asked. His voice was quiet, careful, like he was afraid of the answer. Do what? But I already knew. I'd seen the posts, the so-called evidence, the documents, the code theft, He stopped, shaking his head. "My mentor showed me everything, Olivia. Your IP address, your login timestamps. I want to believe you, but the evidence is perfect," I finished. Because of course it was. Morgan had always been thorough. "Just tell me the truth," he begged. "If you're in trouble, if you needed money, we could have—" "I didn't do it." My voice cracked. "Raphael, I would never." "Then explain it. Explain how your account accessed my family's private server. Explain the messages to my competitors." "Explain." "I can't. Because how do you fight a lie that's been crafted by someone who knows exactly which threads to pull to unravel your entire life?" He stared at me for a long moment, rain starting to soak through his jacket. The neon light from the coffee shop behind us cast everything in sickly yellow-green, making the moment feel like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I really am." Then he turned and walked away. I stood there motionless as the rain picked up, soaked and silent, watching him disappear into the crowd of students rushing to get out of the weather. "I would have never hurt you," I whispered to the empty space where he'd been standing. But he was already gone. The next morning I withdrew from university, packed my single dorm room into 2 boxes, deleted BridgeEd from my laptop and every cloud server we'd used. I watched our dreams dissolve like chalk in water, leaving nothing behind but a faint stain and the bitter taste of what could have been. They say time heals all wounds. I don't think that's true. Time doesn't heal. It just teaches you how to carry the weight without collapsing under it. 3 years passed like water through cupped hands. Not fast, not slow, just inevitable. I found work at a small nonprofit called Horizons for Girls, tucked into a converted warehouse in a part of the city where hope came in small doses and big dreams felt like luxuries most people couldn't afford. The pay was barely enough to cover my studio apartment and groceries, but it gave me something I hadn't felt since Bridget died: purpose. Every Tuesday and Thursday evening, 12 girls between the ages of 10 and 16 would file into our cramped classroom with its flickering fluorescent lights and mismatched chairs. They came from foster care, from shelters, from homes where love was conditional and safety wasn't guaranteed. They came because someone told them they mattered. I saw myself in every single one of them. There was Jasmine, who wore the same hoodie every day and never made eye contact. Maya, who asked 1,000 questions about college, even though she was only 12. Keisha, who had Sophia's quiet smile and made my chest ache every time she laughed. I taught them coding basics, essay writing, how to dream beyond their circumstances. But mostly I tried to give them the thing I'd spent my whole life searching for: someone who saw them, really saw them. "Miss Olivia," Maya asked one evening, after the others had left, "do you think poor people can still do important things?" I knelt down to her level, the way Sophia used to do with me. "Maya, listen to me. You don't have to be rich to be valuable. Money measures bank accounts. It doesn't measure hearts. And yours?" I tapped her chest gently. "Yours is already worth more than any mansion I've ever lived in." She hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe. That's when I knew I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Not in marble halls or lecture halls or anywhere that required me to be smaller than I was. Just here, in this cramped room with peeling paint and dreams that refused to die. It was late on a Friday evening when everything changed again. I was alone in the office, sorting through boxes of old donation records that our director had been meaning to organize for years. Most of it was junk: outdated tax forms, faded receipts, promotional materials from programs that had ended before I was born. Then I found the box. Small, wooden, pushed to the back corner of the storage closet like someone had deliberately hidden it. The label was handwritten in elegant cursive: "For my grace." My heart stopped. I knew that handwriting. I'd seen it on birthday cards, on notes slipped into my lunchbox, on the bookmarks she'd make and hide in the novel she gave me. Sophia. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper that had yellowed with age, a letter, a small brass key, and a photograph I'd never seen before. Sophia, younger, laughing beside a black woman in nurse's scrubs. The letter was dated 3 weeks before Sophia died. "My dearest Olivia, if you're reading this, then I've run out of time, and I'm so sorry I couldn't tell you these things while I still held your hand. Your mother's name was Eleanor Grace. She was my best friend, my sister in every way that mattered. She was a humanitarian nurse who traveled to disaster zones when everyone else fled. She was fearless and kind, and so full of light that being near her felt like standing in sunshine. She saved my life during a medical crisis overseas. I was sick, dying, and Eleanor refused to leave my side. She gave me her blood, her time, her fierce determination that I would survive. She did save me. But 6 months after you were born, Eleanor died doing what she did best: saving others. A building collapsed in a refugee camp. She went back in for a child who was trapped. She never came out. I promised her, swore on everything sacred, that I would protect you, that I would give you the life she wanted for you, that I would make sure you knew you came from love, not tragedy. Jonah betrayed that promise. He's frozen the trust fund Eleanor set up for you before she died. He's hidden the truth. He's tried to make you believe you're charity when you are legacy. The key opens a safety deposit box at First National Bank, account number 847-22193 EG. Inside, you'll find everything Eleanor left for you: documents, letters, proof. What's yours has been waiting, my darling girl. And so has the truth. You were never saved by us. We were honored by you. All my love. Sophia. Letter slipped from my hands. Tears fell freely, splashing onto the dusty floor, onto the photograph, onto the key that suddenly felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Eleanor Grace. My mother had a name, a story, a legacy. And Sophia, God, Sophia, had tried to protect me even when she was dying, had hidden this truth where Jonah couldn't destroy it, waiting for me to find it when I was strong enough to fight back. I pressed the letter to my chest and sobbed. Not from grief this time, but from something I barely recognized anymore. Hope. The past hadn't buried me after all. It had been waiting to be unearthed. For the first time in 3 years, I smiled through my tears. I felt that old spark, the one Raphael used to see in me, the one I thought Morgan had extinguished forever, flicker back to life in my chest. I wasn't just Olivia the orphan, Olivia the reject, Olivia the girl who should be grateful. I was Eleanor Grace's daughter, and it was time the Whitmores learned exactly what that meant. The law office of Mitchell and Associates looked nothing like the sleek corporate towers where the Whitmores did business. It was tucked above a coffee shop in an older part of downtown, the kind of place with creaking floors and windows that rattled when trucks passed by. Gerald Mitchell was 73, with silver hair and reading glasses that perpetually slid down his nose. He'd been Sophia's personal attorney for 30 years, and when I called his office, voice shaking, explaining who I was and what I'd found, he went silent for so long I thought the line had disconnected. "Miss Grace," he finally said, and his voice cracked on my mother's last name. "I've been waiting for this call for 3 years." Now I sat across from him. Sophia's letter and key spread on his desk like evidence in a trial that was only just beginning. "She came to me 6 weeks before she died," he said, pulling a thick accordion folder from his file cabinet. "She knew Jonah would try to bury this. She knew he'd never honor Eleanor's wishes. So we built a safeguard." He opened the folder, and my breath caught. Documents. Dozens of them. Trust agreements, bank statements, transfer records. And there, in black and white, proof of everything Sophia had written. A trust fund established by Eleanor Grace in 2007, worth $2.3 million, designated for Olivia Margaret Grace upon her 18th birthday or upon Eleanor's death, whichever came first. I was 18 now, had been for 3 years. "Where did it go?" I whispered, even though I already knew the answer. Gerald's jaw tightened. Jonah created shell companies, fake consulting fees, real estate transfers that existed only on paper. He moved the money in circles until it looked like it had never existed at all. By the time Sophia realized what he'd done, she was too sick to fight him in court. My fingers shook as I touched the papers. Numbers swam before my eyes. Dates, signatures, Jonah's signature, forged over and over, authorizing transfers that should have required my consent. "He stole my life," I whispered. Gerald leaned forward, and his eyes, sharp despite his age, held mine with an intensity that made me sit up straighter. "He can't steal what's already written in your name, Miss Grace. The law is slow, but it's not blind. We have everything we need. Sophia made sure of that." Something inside me shifted in that moment. Not just anger, though God knows there was plenty of that. Not just grief for everything I'd lost, but something harder, clearer. A determination that felt like steel settling into my spine. "What do I need to do?" I asked. "Fight," he said simply. "File petitions, gather witnesses, build a case so airtight that even Jonah's lawyers can't wriggle out of it. And most importantly," he slid another document across the desk. "Bring back what Sophia really wanted, the Eleanor Foundation. My mother's legacy, the humanitarian work she died doing, the dreams Sophia had tried to preserve. It was registered years ago but never activated," Gerald explained. "Sophia set it up as a nonprofit dedicated to helping underprivileged girls access education and mentorship. She wanted it to be yours someday, to carry your mother's name forward." I stared at the registration documents, at my mother's name typed in official legal text, and felt something I hadn't felt in years, the weight of purpose settling over my shoulders like a cloak I'd been meant to wear all along. "Then let's bring it back," I said. The next 2 months were a blur of paperwork, meetings, and late nights hunched over my laptop in my tiny apartment. Gerald filed the petitions. I tracked down bank records, interviewed Sophia's old friends who remembered Eleanor, and slowly, methodically, built the foundation back from its dormant state. Horizons for Girls became the first partner program. We started small, just an expanded mentorship initiative with funding that finally let us pay our volunteers and buy new computers for the girls. But it was a beginning. A seed planted in soil that Jonah had tried to salt. I was reviewing grant applications one evening when my phone buzzed with a news alert. Whitmore Holdings under federal investigation for fraud. My heart stopped. I clicked the article. Jonah Whitmore, real estate magnate and philanthropist, is facing federal scrutiny following allegations of embezzlement and fraudulent financial transfers. Sources close to the investigation suggest the probe involves misappropriated trust funds and offshore accounts dating back over a decade. I read it 3 times. Then I called Gerald. "Did you?" "The evidence we gathered for your case caught some attention," he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "Federal investigators have been looking into Whitmore Holdings for years. Your documentation gave them the missing pieces." Justice moved slowly. But apparently it was finally moving. 2 weeks later, the invitation arrived. Not to me personally, to the Eleanor Foundation, care of our office address at Horizons for Girls. The Whitmore family cordially invites the Eleanor Foundation to participate as a volunteer coordinator for the annual Presidential Charity Gala, benefiting youth education initiatives. The event will be held at the Whitmore Estate and will feature remarks from the President of the United States. I stared at the embossed invitation, at the address printed in elegant script beneath the Whitmore family crest. 1447 Belmont Drive, my old home. The mansion where I'd counted 32 rooms as a child, where Sophia had tucked me into bed and whispered that I mattered, where Jonah had served me cruelty on fine china and called it gratitude. My hands didn't shake this time. They were steady as I read through the details. The Whitmores needed legitimate nonprofits to legitimize their image-saving event. They needed organizations with clean reputations to stand beside them while cameras rolled and the president smiled for photos. They had no idea one of those organizations belonged to me. The irony was so perfect it almost made me laugh. Maya walked into the office and saw me holding the invitation. "Miss Olivia, you okay?" I looked up at her, this brilliant 12-year-old who reminded me so much of myself, and realized I wasn't just doing this for me anymore. I was doing it for every girl who'd ever been told she was charity when she was legacy. For every child who'd been made invisible in rooms that should have protected them. For my mother, who died saving others. For Sophia, who tried to save me. And for myself, the girl I used to be and the woman I was becoming. "Yeah," I said softly. "I'm okay." I picked up my phone and typed a response to the coordinator. "The Eleanor Foundation accepts your invitation. We look forward to supporting this important event." For a long moment after I hit send, I just sat there, staring at the address on the invitation. Then I whispered to the empty office, to Sophia's memory, to whatever version of myself had survived this long. If this is where it ends, let it end in truth. The gala was 6 weeks away, and I had a feeling that when I walked back through those mansion doors, nothing would ever be the same again. The mansion looked exactly the same. That's what struck me first as I stepped out of the catering van. Not that it had changed, but that it hadn't. The same stone lions guarding the circular driveway. The same topiaries shaped like perfect spirals. The same golden light spilling from floor-to-ceiling windows, making everything glow like a movie set designed to convince the world that beauty and goodness were the same thing. I'd forgotten how much this place was built to lie. "Coordinators check in at the east entrance," someone called out, clipboard in hand, barely glancing at me as I adjusted my simple black dress and the lanyard around my neck that read Eleanor Foundation. Event staff. Not Olivia Grace. Not the girl who used to live here. Just another worker in black, invisible by design. Exactly how I needed it to be. The east entrance took me through the kitchen I remembered from childhood. Bigger now, renovated with commercial equipment for tonight's spectacle. Staff rushed past carrying silver trays, adjusting bow ties, checking lists on tablets. I moved through them like a ghost, muscle memory guiding me through hallways I'd once run down as a 6-year-old who still believed in fairy tales. The ballroom took my breath away, not because it was beautiful, I'd expected that, but because they'd transformed it into something that looked like heaven's waiting room. Crystal chandeliers refracted light into 1,000 tiny rainbows. Ice sculptures shaped like doves perched on tables draped in white silk. A string quartet played in the corner, while guests in designer gowns and tailored tuxedos drifted through the space like they were dancing even when standing still. Everything shimmered. Everything glittered. Everything was a lie made of light and money and desperation to convince the world that the Whitmore family still mattered. I checked my clipboard, confirmed the volunteer stations, and tried to become part of the wallpaper. Tried to ignore the way my heart hammered against my ribs every time I glimpsed a familiar face from my childhood. Jonah's business partners, old family friends who'd watched me grow up and then pretended not to know me after Sophia died. I was doing fine, breathing normally, staying focused on my job, until I heard her voice. Well, well, look what the caterers dragged in. Morgan stood 10 feet away in a silver gown that probably cost more than I'd made in the last 6 months. Her hair was swept into an elegant updo, diamonds glinting at her throat. Her makeup so perfectly applied she looked like a magazine cover brought to life. She looked exactly like someone who'd never suffered a day in her life. Still serving tables, Olivia? She glided closer, champagne glass in hand, that familiar smirk curling her lips. Some people never rise above their station, do they? I suppose it's good you'd found you in your calling. Service work suits you. Other guests were starting to notice. I could feel their eyes, their curiosity, their barely concealed delight at witnessing potential drama at a stuffy charity event. I met Morgan's gaze, held it, and said nothing. Not because I didn't have words. God, I had words. 3 years worth of words that had been building like pressure behind a dam. But I'd learned something in those quiet years at Horizons for Girls, sitting with children who'd survived worse than I had. Sometimes silence speaks louder than fury. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to give your enemy the reaction they're craving. So I stood there, calm and still, and watched Morgan's smirk falter when I didn't flinch. Didn't cry, didn't run. Didn't give her anything at all. Excuse me, Baistu, I said quietly, professionally. I need to check on the volunteer stations. I walked past her, head high, and heard her sharp intake of breath, the sound of someone who just realized their weapon had lost its edge. Small victory, but I'd take it. Jonah took the stage at 8 o'clock sharp, microphone in hand, the presidential seal projected on the screen behind him. He looked distinguished in his tuxedo, silver-haired and confident. Every inch the philanthropist the world believed him to be. Tonight, he began, voice smooth as aged whiskey, we gather not just as individuals, but as a family committed to values that transcend wealth, education, opportunity, the belief that every child deserves a chance to rise. I stood in the back near the kitchen entrance and felt bile rise in my throat. Values. This man who'd frozen my inheritance and called it financial responsibility. Who'd moved me to servants' quarters and called it teaching me gratitude. Who'd erased every trace of me from the house the moment Sophia's body was cold. Cameras recorded every word. Reporters nodded appreciatively. Emma posed beside a senator, her smile practiced and perfect. The Whitmore family values on full display. I checked my watch. 20 minutes until the president's arrival. 20 minutes until I could finish my duties and leave this place forever. Then I heard it. The low hum of engines. Multiple engines. Heavy and deliberate and unmistakable. Conversations stuttered. Heads turned toward the windows. Someone gasped. A convoy of black vehicles rolled into the circular driveway like a scene from a political thriller. SUVs with tinted windows. Security vehicles bristling with antennae. And in the center, a limousine bearing flags in the weight of the most powerful office in the world. The Secret Service emerged first, sharp-eyed and efficient, establishing perimeter and protocol with military precision. Guests pressed toward the windows, cameras pivoted. Jonah descended the stage, smile widening, arms opening in welcome. This was his moment, the image he'd paid for. The President of the United States at his home, validating his importance, erasing any whisper of federal investigation with a single handshake. The limousine door opened. The President stepped out, waving to the cameras positioned at careful angles. Secret Service agents flanked him as he approached the entrance. And then a second door opened. A man emerged, tall, lean, wearing a perfectly tailored navy suit that somehow made him look both powerful and humble. His dark hair was shorter than I remembered, touched with silver at the temples despite his relative youth. He moved with the quiet confidence of someone who'd learned that real power didn't need to announce itself. My heart stopped. No, not him, not here, not now. The crowd erupted into excited murmurs. Cameras flashed like lightning. I heard someone near me whisper, "That's Raphael Sinclair, the tech billionaire, the one who funds all those humanitarian programs." Raphael Sinclair, who'd built an empire, who'd become everything we dreamed about during late nights in university libraries, who'd walked away from me in the rain and never looked back. He stood beside the president, shaking hands with Jonah, and his gaze swept the ballroom like he was looking for something. Someone. And then he found me. Time didn't just slow, it folded, collapsed. Every moment between that rainy night 3 years ago and this crystalline present compressed into a single point of contact. His eyes widened, shock, recognition, something that looked almost like pain. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything except stand there in my simple black dress with my coordinator's badge, holding a clipboard like it was the only thing keeping me tethered to earth. He whispered something to the aide beside him, started moving through the crowd, toward me. "Miss Grace?" His voice carried across the ballroom. Not loud, but in the sudden hush that fell over the room, it might as well have been a shout. Every guest froze. Every conversation stopped. Morgan's champagne glass halted halfway to her lips. Jonah's smile cracked at the edges. Because Raphael Sinclair, billionaire, presidential guest, the man who had the attention of every important person in this room, was walking past senators and celebrities and power brokers to address the girl in the staff uniform standing by the kitchen entrance. "After all these years," he said softly as he reached me, and his eyes held everything we'd lost, everything he'd thought was gone. Olivia! In that instant, every humiliation crystallized. Every scar became a story. Every night I'd prayed for dignity, for justice, for the chance to prove that I was more than what they tried to make me. All of it stood balanced on the edge of something that felt like reversal, like vindication, like the beginning of an ending I'd been writing in my bones for 3 long years. The cameras turned toward us, the crowd held its breath, and I realized that sometimes grace doesn't arrive quietly. Sometimes it lands on your front lawn with the President of the United States and the man you thought you'd lost forever. Sometimes it speaks your name in front of everyone who tried to make you forget it mattered. The president's speech was brief and gracious, the kind of practiced rhetoric that acknowledged the Whitmore's generosity without actually committing to anything specific. Then he turned to Raphael with a smile that seemed genuine. "And now I'd like to invite Mr. Raphael Sinclair to share some exciting news about a new initiative that embodies the spirit of what we're celebrating tonight." Applause rippled through the ballroom as Raphael took the stage. He moved with that same quiet confidence I remembered, but there was something else now, a gravity, a sense of purpose that made the room instinctively lean forward. "Thank you, Mr. President," he began, his voice steady and clear. "Tonight, I'm honored to announce the Eleanor Project, an international education fund dedicated to providing mentorship, resources, and opportunity to underprivileged girls around the world." More applause. Cameras flashed. I stood frozen in my corner, Raphael's words washing over me like a wave I hadn't seen coming. Eleanor, my mother's name, spoken in this ballroom, announced to the world. Jonah stepped forward, smile firmly in place, clearly ready to bask in reflected glory. "We are deeply honored," he said, his voice carrying that practiced warmth he reserved for cameras, "that our family's commitment to philanthropy has inspired such noble work." Our family, I felt something crack in my chest. Of course Jonah would try to claim this too. Try to wrap himself in my mother's legacy like it was just another expensive suit tailored for public consumption. But Raphael's expression didn't change. He simply nodded, reached into his jacket pocket, and pulled out a tablet. "Actually," Osini said quietly, and something in his tone made the entire room go still, "I think it's important that everyone understands the true inspiration behind this project. He tapped the screen once. The massive display behind him, the one that had been showing the Whitmore family crest and elegant event graphics, suddenly changed. Documents appeared. Legal documents, bank statements, a will written in elegant script. Sophia's will. My breath caught in my throat. Eleanor Grace, Raphael continued, his voice soft but somehow filling every corner of the ballroom, was a humanitarian nurse who died saving lives in a refugee camp 20 years ago. She left behind a daughter, a little girl she'd entrusted to her best friend's care. Another tap. The screen split, showing bank transfers, account numbers. Corporate shell companies with familiar names. Whitmore Holdings, Whitmore Capital, JW Enterprises. Eleanor also left behind a trust fund, $2.3 million designated for her daughter's education and future, a fund that was supposed to be released on the child's 18th birthday. The audience had gone completely silent. You could have heard a champagne bubble burst. Raphael's fingers moved across the tablet, and more documents appeared. Forged signatures, false transfer authorizations, a paper trail so clear it might as well have been highlighted in neon. Instead, he said, and his voice carried an edge now, that fund was systematically embezzled through fraudulent transfers and hidden in offshore accounts. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Reporters scrambled for their phones. Cameras swiveled between the screen and Jonah, whose face had gone from confident to ashen in the space of 3 sentences. This project, Raphael continued, turning to look directly at Jonah, was never inspired by your family, Mr. Whitmore. It was meant to belong to Eleanor Grace's daughter, to the woman who should have had access to her inheritance 3 years ago, but was instead told she was nothing, told she should be grateful for scraps. Morgan's champagne glass slipped from her fingers, shattering on the marble floor with a sound like breaking ice. The Eleanor Project, Raphael said, his voice returning to that steady calm, belongs to its rightful heir, to the woman Eleanor Grace and Sophia Whitmore both tried to protect. He turned away from Jonah, away from the president, away from every powerful person in that room, and looked directly at me. Olivia Grace. My name echoed through the ballroom like a stone dropped in still water, sending ripples in every direction. 300 people turned to look at me. The girl in the simple black dress, the coordinator with the clipboard, the invisible staff member who was supposed to blend into the expensive wallpaper. Cameras swung toward me. Lights blazed, and I stood there, exposed and seen in a way I'd spent 3 years trying to avoid. This project carries your mother's name, Raphael said, his eyes never leaving mine. It honors Sophia's dying wish, and it belongs to you, not as charity, but as legacy, as your birthright. The crowd erupted into whispers. A ripple of disbelief spread through the hall like wind through wheat. I heard my name repeated, passed from mouth to mouth, spoken by people who'd walked past me all night without a second glance. Morgan's face had gone pale as death. Emma stood frozen, hand pressed to her mouth. And Jonah's knuckles were white where they gripped the edge of the podium, his jaw working, his eyes darting between the screen and Raphael and me like he was trying to calculate an escape route from a trap that had already closed. Raphael took a step forward, still holding my gaze across the sea of people. I built my first company on an idea you gave me, Olivia, an app to connect rural students to education. BridgeEd, you taught me what compassion looks like when no one's watching, when there are no cameras, no audiences, just 2 people trying to make the world a little less cruel. His voice cracked slightly, and I saw a regret flash across his face like lightning. I failed you once. I believed lies instead of trusting what I knew in my heart to be true. I won't make that mistake again. For the first time in 3 years, for the first time since that rainy night when he walked away, I didn't look down, didn't hide, didn't make myself smaller. I held his gaze and let him see everything. The girl I'd been, the woman I'd become, the scars and the strength and the stubborn refusal to disappear that had kept me breathing through every humiliation. The crowd began whispering my name in earnest now, not with pity, not with contempt, with recognition. Olivia Grace, the adopted daughter. She's the heir. The trust fund, the truth spreading like wildfire, burning through every carefully constructed lie the Whitmores had built their empire on. Grace had returned, not as charity, not as the girl who should be grateful for scraps from the table, but as legacy, as the daughter of a hero, as the rightful owner of everything they'd tried to steal. And standing in that ballroom under those crystal chandeliers that had witnessed every humiliation of my childhood, I finally understood what Sophia had tried to tell me all those years ago. You don't earn your worth. You don't prove your right to exist. You simply are. And sometimes, if you survive long enough, the truth catches up to the lies. Tonight, it finally had. The silence before the storm lasted exactly 3 seconds. This is absurd. Jonah's voice cracked across the ballroom like a whip. His face had gone crimson, a vein pulsing at his temple. These are fabrications, manipulated documents from disgruntled former employees. I will not stand here. And, but Peter, Whitmore. The security chief's voice was granite. 2 agents in dark suits materialized at Jonah's elbows, their presence more suggestion than threat. For now. Behind them, the enormous screen that had displayed the Whitmore Foundation's glossy promotional video now told a different story. Bank statements scrolled past in damning succession. Email chains, offshore account transfers, contract writers with clauses that would make a lawyer blush. Each document bore Jonah's signature, that distinctive flourish he'd always been so proud of. The ballroom had transformed into something between a courtroom and a theater. Guests who moments ago had been sipping champagne now stood frozen, cocktail glasses suspended midair. Someone's phone clattered to the marble floor. No one bent to retrieve it. Near the president's table, aides huddled like conspirators, their whispers creating a white noise of scandal. Phones emerged from pockets and purses. Fingers flew across screens. The machinery of political distancing had already begun its efficient work. By tomorrow, the president's photo ops with Jonah Whitmore would be mysteriously absent from official archives. Morgan Whitmore's carefully constructed facade crumbled like antique plaster. Mascara tracked down her powdered cheeks in twin rivulets of black, cutting through foundation that had taken her stylist 40 minutes to perfect. She clutched her champagne flute so tightly her knuckles went white. When it shattered in her grip, she didn't seem to notice the blood. Across the room, Emma's sobs rose above the murmuring crowd. She'd collapsed into a gilt chair, her designer gown pooling around her like a melting wedding cake. Daddy didn't know, she kept saying to anyone who would listen. He couldn't have known. But her voice carried no conviction, only the desperate plea of a child who just learned that monsters were real. Through it all, Raphael stood motionless at the podium. He didn't shout, didn't gesture, didn't perform the righteous fury everyone expected. Instead, he waited, patient as stone, steady as tide, until the chaos found its own exhaustion. When he finally spoke, his voice carried to every corner of the vast room without effort. Mr. President, he turned toward the main table where the most powerful man in the nation sat with the careful neutrality of someone already calculating political costs. There's someone I need you to meet. Raphael descended from the podium, his footsteps echoing in the sudden quiet. He moved through the crowd like water finding its path, guests parting instinctively before him. When he reached Olivia, her face was pale as moonlight, her eyes wide with something between terror and wonder. Her hand trembled when he took it. He squeezed gently, anchoring her. Sir, Raphael said, his voice clear and unwavering, this is the woman who inspired this cause. She taught me what compassion means. She showed me that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's standing up despite it. He guided Olivia forward, felt her resistance, felt her yield. The cameras swiveled like predators catching a scent. Flashbulbs exploded in constellation patterns. The press corps, sensing blood in the water, surged against the velvet ropes that separated them from the main floor. Mr. President, may I introduce the woman who changed my life, my partner, Olivia Grace. The ballroom detonated. Gasps rippled outward from the epicenter of their joined hands. Someone screamed, brief and sharp, quickly stifled. A champagne tower collapsed with a crystalline crash that no one even turned to see. The photographers abandoned all pretense of professional restraint. climbing over chairs and each other for the shot. No, Jonah's voice was barely a whisper, but somehow it carried. No, not her. Not your daughter, Raphael finished quietly. The one you tried to erase. The one whose name you removed from every family photo, every trust document, every memory you thought you could control. Jonah Whitmore's empire, built on manipulation, maintained through fear, polished to a blinding shine, shattered like the champagne flute still clutched in Morgan's bleeding hand. You could almost hear it, the crack of reputation splintering, the crash of influence collapsing, the whisper of power draining away like water through desperate fingers. The president's chief of staff was already ushering him toward a side exit. Donors who'd arrived in solidarity were suddenly very interested in their phones, their coats, their urgent need to be anywhere else. Jonah's board members melted into the crowd like guilty shadows fleeing dawn. Through it all, Olivia stood paralyzed, Raphael's hand her only anchor to reality. Ms. Grace, the president's press secretary, had appeared at her elbow, voice urgent but measured. The press is asking if you'll make a statement. Olivia looked at Raphael. He nodded just once. You can do this. She turned to face the cameras, the crowd, the wreckage of her former life. Her voice, when it came, was barely above a whisper, but in that cathedral-like space, it rang like a bell. I was raised in this house. Her eyes swept the marble columns, the crystal chandeliers, the oil paintings of Whitmore ancestors who'd never known her name. But love doesn't live in marble halls. Her voice grew stronger, clearer. It lives where truth can breathe, where people matter more than appearances, where compassion isn't a tax write-off or a photo opportunity. It's a choice we make every single day. The words echoed through the ballroom, bouncing off walls that had witnessed a century of Whitmore triumphs. But they would remember this night differently. They would remember the girl who came home not to claim her inheritance, but to burn it down. By morning, the headlines would crown her, the girl who dethroned the Whitmores. Cable news would dissect every frame of video. Her photograph, hand-clasped in Raphael's, chin raised in defiant grace, would be the most shared image on social media within an hour. But tonight, as security finally escorted Jonah toward an uncertain future, as Morgan collapsed into the arms of a horrified socialite, as Emma's sobs faded into the emptiness of marble halls, Olivia wanted only two things: silence and air. Raphael understood. He always did. Together, they slipped through a service entrance as the ballroom descended into beautiful chaos behind them. The November night wrapped around them like a blessing, cold and clean and infinitely free. Above them, stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, indifferent to empires rising and falling below. Somewhere in the distance, sirens wailed, but here in this moment there was only breath and heartbeat and the quiet triumph of truth finally given voice. The reckoning was complete. The night air bit through silk like accusation. Olivia stood at the wrought iron gates, those same gates she'd passed through as a child in hand-me-down dresses, watching her family arrive in cars that cost more than most people's houses. Behind her, the Whitmore mansion blazed with light, every window a burning eye, every chandelier a star stolen from the sky and trapped behind glass. It looked smaller now, or perhaps she'd simply grown. The sounds from the ballroom had faded to a distant murmur, like the ocean heard through a seashell. Sirens had come and gone. So had the first wave of press, their news vans trailing Jonah's security escort like pilot fish following a wounded shark. What remained was silence, and cold, and the strange, hollow feeling of aftermath. She heard his footsteps before she saw him, knew them by heart, the measured pace, the slight hesitation before he reached her, as if asking permission to enter her orbit. "You're not running away, are you?" Raphael's voice was soft, careful. "After all that?" "No, Hodkin." She didn't turn, just trying to remember how to breathe. He came to stand beside her, close enough that she could feel his warmth against the November chill. For a moment, they simply stood there, two figures silhouetted against the dying light of everything that had been. "I found out years ago," Raphael said finally, "about Morgan's lies, about everything." Olivia's breath caught. "Years?" "3 years, maybe 4. His voice carried the weight of secrets kept for good reason. I hired investigators when you first told me your story. I needed to know the truth. When the documents came back, he exhaled slowly. I wanted to expose them immediately, burn it all down in righteous fury. Why didn't you? Because you were wronged in public. He turned to face her, his eyes dark and serious, in front of everyone who mattered to them. I wanted to make it right the same way, where it would count, where it would mean something. In the spotlight, they used to cast you out. The tears came then, hot against her cold cheeks. Years of carrying the weight alone, of believing no one cared enough to dig deeper, of thinking maybe she'd imagined her own worth. All of it broke like fever. You didn't have to do that, she whispered. I did. His hand found hers, fingers lacing together with the ease of practice. Because you never stopped believing in people, even when they didn't believe in you, even when they gave you every reason to become bitter and hard. You stayed soft, stayed kind. That's not weakness, Olivia. That's courage. She leaned into him and he caught her weight the way he always had. The embrace felt like absolution, like homecoming, like the weight of years dissolving into something lighter than air. Behind them, Dubai one, the mansion's lights began to go dark. At sunrise, the Whitmore estate stood silent as a mausoleum. No cars graced the circular drive. No servants bustled through marble halls. The fountain in the courtyard, that fountain where Olivia had once made wishes on pennies she'd found in the street, ran drizzy. By noon, the news had circled the globe. Adopted heiress reclaims legacy in stunning expose. Whitmore empire crumbles as fraud charges mount. The girl they called poor, Olivia Grace's journey from exile to vindication. Jonah Whitmore faced 17 counts of fraud, embezzlement, and tax evasion. His lawyers were good, but the evidence was better. Morgan lost her seat on every charitable board she'd ever graced with her presence. The invitations that had once flooded her mailbox dried up overnight. Emma fled to Europe, her social media accounts deleted, her phone number changed. She left no forwarding address. Some castles fall quickly, others crumble brick by brick. But the result is always the same, dust in memory, nothing more. 3 weeks later, Olivia stood before a wall of cameras, microphones thrust toward her like offerings. Behind her, the newly renamed Eleanor Foundation, named for the grandmother who taught her that grace meant more than pedigree, rose from the bones of the old Whitmore headquarters. They'd gutted it completely, stripped away the pretense and rebuilt something true. Raphael stood at her side, as he always would. Not behind her, not in front, beside, equal, partner, home. Ms. Grace, a reporter called. How does it feel to go from homeless advocate to CEO in 3 weeks? Olivia smiled. It was a real smile this time, not the careful construction of someone hiding wounds. I've always been working toward this, she said. The title just changed. The work never did. The press conference ended with applause, genuine applause, not the polite patter of obligation. As they descended the steps, a familiar sound drew every eye skyward. A private jet descended through the clouds, sleek and white, adorned with both national and presidential insignia. It touched down on the helipad with balletic grace, and the door opened to reveal stairs lined in red carpet, an invitation, an acknowledgement, a beginning. The wind swept Olivia's hair across her face as she climbed the stairs, Raphael's hand warm in hers. At the top, she paused, looked back at the city spread below them like a living tapestry. All those limbs, all those stories, all that hope and hurt woven together into something beautiful and broken and worth fighting for. A reporter shouted one last question. What would you say to those who judged you? Olivia's voice carried clear and certain on the wind. They called me poor because they couldn't measure grace. But grace was never about wealth, about marble floors or trust funds or your name carved in stone. She looked at Raphael, then back at the cameras. Grace was always about rising, about lifting others as you climb, about remembering where you came from while reaching for where you're going. The jet door closed. Engines hummed to life. As they soared into a golden sky, that impossible autumn gold that turns the world to honey and hope, Olivia pressed her hand against the window. Below, the Whitmore mansion grew smaller and smaller until it was nothing but a shadow on the landscape, a cautionary tale. A reminder that empires built on shame inevitably crumble, while those built on grace endure. The ashes of the past scattered on the wind. Redemption rose on steady wings. And Olivia Grace, poor no more, rich always, flew toward a future she'd earned not with inheritance, but with the currency that mattered most. An unbreakable spirit, an open heart, and the quiet, revolutionary power of choosing kindness in a world that had given her every reason to choose cruelty. The jet disappeared into clouds like a promise kept. Below, the city carried on, one story ending, 1,000 more beginning. Grace, after all, was never finite. It multiplied in the giving.